Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something that always seems to get people talking, presidential pardons.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, we're diving into President Biden's recent pardon of his son, Hunter.
Right.
You've sent us a ton of stuff on this, news articles, legal opinions. We even got some personal reflections, so there's a lot to unpack.
It's really interesting, how this whole thing has become such a flashpoint.
Yeah.
It brings up so many bigger issues about, justice and power and accountability in our political system.
It really does feel like people are looking at this pardon like some kind of test.
Huh.
Like a Rorschach test, where they see in it what they already believe about the Bidens or about the justice system,
Right.
maybe even about America as a whole.
Yeah, totally. So what we're going to try to do today is go beyond the headlines and all the hot takes.
Okay.
We're going to dig into the facts of Hunter Biden's case and really examine a legal and historical context of presidential pardons.
Right.
And then explore what this specific pardon could mean, both for the Bidens and for the future of the presidency.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
Remind us, what charges was Hunter Biden even facing? What were the potential consequences? And why was this pardon such a big deal?
Sure. So back in June, Hunter Biden agreed to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax offenses.
Okay.
Basically, he didn't pay taxes in 2017 and 2018.
Gotcha.
And this came out of an investigation that had been going on since 2018. Now, separately, there was also a felony gun charge.
Okay.
He possessed a firearm illegally while being a drug user.
Uh-huh.
And that one was supposed to be resolved through something called a pretrial diversion agreement.
Okay, before we go any further, let's break that down for our listeners.
Yeah.
What exactly is a pretrial diversion agreement, and how does it work?
It's kind of an alternative to a traditional plea deal.
Hmm.
It's often used for first-time offenders in cases that aren't violent.
Okay.
Basically, the defendant agrees to certain conditions, things like drug treatment or community service. And if they successfully complete the program, the charges are dropped, and they don't end up with a criminal record.
So it's like a second chance, a way to keep people out of the criminal justice system for relatively minor offenses.
Exactly. But the key thing to remember is that it's still a legal process that's overseen by the courts.
Right.
Now, in Hunter's case, this pretrial diversion agreement on the gun charge, along with the guilty plea on the tax charges, meant he was facing potential prison time, even if it wasn't super likely that he would actually serve much time.
And then comes the pardon from his father just days before Hunter's sentencing hearing.
Right.
Was this like a full pardon that wiped the slate clean, or were there any conditions attached?
It was a full and unconditional pardon covering both the tax charges and the gun charge.
Wow.
So that effectively ended the legal process
Yeah.
and erased any potential criminal liability for Hunter Biden. And there's actually another thing that's making this whole thing even more controversial. The pardon doesn't just cover these specific charges. It's way broader than that.
Okay, this is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
Give us the details on the scope of this pardon and why it's raising so many eyebrows.
So the pardon actually extends all the way back to January 2014.
Wow.
And it covers any potential federal crimes committed up to December 2024.
So it's not just about protecting him from past actions. It's like giving him a free pass for anything that might come up in the future.
Yeah.
You got it.
No wonder people are reading between the lines here.
Absolutely. And the timing, especially that start date of January 2014, has really fueled a lot of speculation.
All right.
Why that date? Well, it just so happens to coincide with Hunter Biden's involvement with a Ukrainian energy company called Burisma Holdings.
Right.
And that's been at the center of a whole lot of controversy and allegations of wrongdoing.
Ah, yes. Ukraine, that connection is impossible to ignore, especially with all these ongoing investigations into Hunter's business dealings over there.
Yeah.
We'll definitely have to dive deeper into that later on. But before we go there, let's talk about the official reason for the pardon. What reasons did President Biden actually give for making this decision?
The official statement was actually pretty brief.
Okay.
It simply said that the pardon was based on President Biden's authority under the Constitution. And it didn't really go into any detail about the reasoning behind it.
That's a lot of power given to one person.
It is.
It makes you wonder how other presidents throughout history have used this pardon power. And what the legal limits even are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There have been some pretty high-profile presidential pardons throughout history that have caused major controversy.
Right.
Looking back at those, could give us some valuable insight for understanding what this particular pardon might mean.
Okay, perfect. That's a great place to pick up when we come back.
Sounds good.
We'll delve into those historical precedents and see what they might tell us about the Biden pardon.
All right.
Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into this whole history of presidential pardons.
All right.
You mentioned some pretty high-profile examples that caused quite a stir.
Yeah.
What can those tell us about how this power's been used and maybe even abused in the past?
Well, there's a long and complicated history here.
Right.
But let's focus on a few key cases that are especially relevant to the Biden situation.
Okay.
One that immediately comes to mind is President Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon back in 1974.
Ah, yes, Watergate.
Right.
That was a defining moment for America, Roan. Nixon resigning in disgrace, the country so divided.
Yeah.
It must have taken a lot of courage for Ford to issue that pardon.
It was a hugely controversial decision,
Yeah,
and people are still debating its consequences today.
I bet.
Some argued it was essential, for the nation to heal and move on from the trauma of Watergate. They saw it as an act of, statesmanship, putting the country's interests above political retribution.
But I imagine others felt like it was letting Nixon off the hook,
Oh, absolutely.
denying justice to the American people.
Many people saw it as a blatant cover-up,
Right.
shielding a corrupt president from being held accountable. And they argued that it set a dangerous precedent, implying that, those in power are above the law.
Yeah,
The pardon really cast a long shadow over Ford's presidency,
it did.
and some believe it ultimately cost him re-election.
That's a stark reminder of the potential political fallout from these types of decisions.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if Biden considered the historical parallels and the potential damage to his own legacy when he pardoned Hunter.
It's impossible to know for sure what was going through his mind,
True.
but the similarities are definitely striking.
They are.
Both involve presidents using their pardon power to protect someone close to them from facing potential legal consequences.
All right.
And of course, it sparked accusations of favoritism and double standards.
Are there any other historical examples that can help us understand the current situation?
Well, another one that comes up a lot is President Bill Clinton's pardon of his half-brother Roger Clinton in 2001.
Okay.
Roger had been convicted on drug charges,
Okay.
and the pardon was widely seen as a parting gift from Clinton as he was leaving office.
So we do have a precedent for presidents pardoning family members.
We do.
But what makes the Hunter Biden situation different besides, the current political climate?
I think there are a few things that make this pardon stand out.
Okay.
First, the timing is really significant.
Okay.
It came just days before Hunter's sentencing hearing,
Right.
which creates the impression that it was a last-minute intervention to prevent him from facing any legal consequences.
It almost feels like a preemptive strike.
Yeah.
Designed to shut down any further scrutiny of Hunter's actions.
That's definitely the perception among many critics. Then there's the scope of the pardon, which, like we talked about, goes way beyond just the immediate tax and gun charges.
Right.
That broad time frame, extending back to 2014 and all the way to 2024, really raises questions about what the Biden administration might be trying to protect Hunter from.
And then, of course, there's that inescapable connection to Ukraine,
Right.
which has been a political minefield for the Bidens for years now.
Exactly. Hunter Biden's business dealings in Ukraine, particularly his involvement with Burisma Holdings,
Right.
have been the subject of intense scrutiny and allegations of corruption.
Yeah.
And the fact that the pardon covers the period when he was working for Burisma just adds fuel to the fire for those conspiracy theories.
Okay, let's unpack those allegations a bit.
Sure.
For those who haven't been following this whole saga super closely, can you give us like a quick recap of Hunter Biden's dealings in Ukraine and why they've been so controversial?
Right. So back in 2014, Hunter joined the board of Burisma Holdings, which is a Ukrainian natural gas company. And this was right around the time when his father, then Vice President Joe Biden, was deeply involved in U.S. policy toward Ukraine.
Yeah, I can see how that would raise some red flags.
Yeah,
The optics aren't great, to say the least.
not really.
People immediately started questioning whether Hunter was even qualified for such a high-level position.
Right.
And whether his appointment was a blatant conflict of interest.
Exactly. The suspicion was that Hunter's position was basically a way for Burisma to gain influence with the U.S. government, potentially through his father.
So essentially influence peddling, using family connections to get favorable treatment.
That's the accusation.
Gotcha.
Now, it is important to note that there's no concrete evidence that Joe Biden directly intervened in any matters related to Burisma to benefit his son.
Okay.
But even the appearance of impropriety is enough to damage public trust.
Right, especially when people are already cynical about political corruption.
You got it.
It feeds into that whole narrative of elites versus everyone else,
Exactly.
which is so powerful these days.
It really is.
We.
And this pardon just amplifies that fear.
Yeah.
It reinforces this idea that political elites can get away with things that ordinary citizens couldn't.
And if that becomes the norm, what safeguards do we even have left? What's to stop a future president from abusing this power even more?
That's a chilling question that a lot of people are asking right now. And it takes us into some pretty murky legal territory.
Okay, I think we need to go there. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Does the Constitution actually allow a president to pardon themselves?
Ah, yes, the self-pardon.
Right.
It's the ultimate constitutional puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's one that legal scholars have been debating for decades.
Because the Constitution doesn't explicitly say you can or can't, right?
Exactly. There's no clear answer.
Right.
And that uncertainty creates a potentially dangerous situation.
Okay.
Imagine a president facing serious criminal charges, maybe even impeachment. Could they just pardon themselves and walk away?
That scenario would send shockwaves through the country.
It would be a constitutional earthquake.
Wow.
It would essentially place the president above the law, completely immune to any consequences for their actions.
Which goes against the very foundation of our democracy.
Exactly.
This idea that no one is above the law.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental principle that's being tested right now.
So who decides? If the Constitution doesn't provide a clear answer, where do we even turn for guidance?
Ultimately, it would be up to the Supreme Court to decide. If a president tried to self-pardon, it would almost certainly trigger a constitutional crisis.
Wow.
The courts would be forced to weigh in,
Yeah.
and their ruling would have profound implications for the balance of power in our government.
And there's no guarantee which way they would rule.
Nope. It would be completely uncharted territory.
A legal showdown that could reshape the presidency itself.
It really could.
That's heavy stuff. But before we get too lost in hypotheticals, let's bring it back to our listener.
Yeah.
What does all of this mean for them, for everyday Americans trying to make sense of this pardon and its implications?
That's a great question. I think the first thing to acknowledge is that this whole situation is stirring up a lot of strong emotions.
Right.
Anger, confusion, betrayal, even fear.
Yeah.
And those feelings are valid.
It's not just about politics.
No, it's not.
It's about people's core beliefs, about fairness and justice and accountability.
Exactly. And when those beliefs are shaken, it can be really unsettling.
So how do we navigate this uncertainty? How do we make sense of this pardon in a way that feels intellectually honest and emotionally grounded?
That's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
We're going to keep exploring the legal and political complexities of this situation,
Okay.
but we're also going to look at the human side of the story.
All right.
We'll examine how this pardon is impacting public trust in the justice system, how it's shaping people's perceptions of the Biden presidency, and what it all means for the future of our democracy.
Okay, that's a perfect lead into our next segment. When we come back, we'll shift gears a bit and dive into the public reaction to this pardon. So we've been really focused on the legal side of things and all historical context of this pardon.
Right.
But I'm really curious what people are saying.
Yeah.
Now, what's the gut reaction out there?
Well, it's been fascinating to see how this pardon has resonated with the public.
Yeah.
The responses are all over the place, really reflecting the deep divisions in our society right now.
You've got a whole stack of sources there, news articles, opinion pieces, social media posts. What are some of the common themes that you're seeing in these reactions?
One thing that really jumps out is this sense of disillusionment,
Okay.
particularly among people who already didn't trust the political system to begin with.
Right.
They see this pardon as like confirmation of their worst fears, that the wealthy and powerful play by a totally different set of rules.
It just plays into that narrative
It does.
of
Yeah,
elites versus everyone else, which is so strong right now.
exactly. And it's not just coming from one side of the aisle either.
Right.
You have people on both the left and the right who are concerned about this potential for abuse of power and the erosion of accountability.
What about the people who support the pardon? What are they saying?
A lot of them emphasize the importance of family
Okay.
and the power of forgiveness. They see this as a father just trying to protect his son,
Right.
and they sympathize with that human element of the story.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with a father's love for his son. But does that really justify a presidential pardon that could have these huge consequences?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where do we draw that line between personal compassion and upholding the rule of law.
It's a tough one.
It is.
And there are no easy answers.
Real.
But one thing is for sure.
What's that?
This pardon has definitely struck a nerve.
Yeah.
It started this national conversation about justice and accountability and what presidential power really means.
And these conversations are happening everywhere.
They are.
On cable news, social media, around the dinner table.
Right.
It's actually encouraging to see people engaging with these complex issues, even if they don't always agree on the answers.
It shows that people still really care about the integrity of our institutions and those core principles that our democracy is built on.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately that's what gives me hope. Even amidst all the division and the cynicism, there's still this desire for a more just and equitable society.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways that you want our listeners to walk away with? What should they be thinking about as they continue to process this pardon and all of its implications?
I think the most important thing is to recognize that this isn't just an isolated incident.
Okay.
This is part of a larger pattern of behavior that we've seen from both parties, where those in power seem to operate under a completely different set of rules.
So recognizing this erosion of accountability that's been happening for years, and how this pardon is just a symptom of a much bigger problem.
Exactly. And we can't just shrug our shoulders and accept this as the new normal.
Right.
We need to hold our leaders accountable,
Yeah.
demand transparency, and really push back against any attempts to undermine the rule of law.
It's a good reminder that our democracy is fragile.
It is.
And it requires constant vigilance and engagement from all of us.
Couldn't agree more. The future of our democracy really depends on informed and active citizens who are willing to speak truth to power.
Well said. So as always, we encourage you, our listener, to keep diving deep.
Yes.
Keep asking those tough questions and never stop seeking knowledge, because the more we understand about the forces that are shaping our world, the better equipped we'll be to create a more just and equitable future for everyone.
Well said. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.